Severe weather warnings across southeastern Queensland and northeastern New South Wales. Heavy rainfall continuing through northern Australia and tropical systems developing that could bring significant impacts to Western Australia in the coming week. That S, what we're dealing with today, Saturday the 17th of January 2026. Right now, conditions across the country are putting people through their paces. Brisbane is absolutely vile. The humidity is off the charts, 38 degrees with moisture thick enough to cut with a knife. Mount Carbine in far north Queensland, too hot to work outside. People are sweating up a storm just doing basic housework. Compare that to what S coming from the south, and you can see why today S weather setup is worth paying close attention to. Southeast Queensland and northeastern New South Wales are under the gun for thunderstorms later this arvo and into the evening. This isn't going to be a massive outbreak by any stretch, but we will see some solid thunderstorm activity, particularly through a couple of key areas. The Scenic Rim, the Lockyer Valley and northeastern New South Wales as that southeasterly change pushes through. The high resolution forecast models are pointing to the Scenic Rim and Lockyer Valley as the hot seat through today. The Granite Belt and Darling Downs as well. These areas could see the stronger cells possibly extending over into the Gold Coast hinterland. The trigger here is a southeasterly change moving through later this afternoon, probably around 5 or 6 p.m. Now, this is a weaker trigger than what we typically see with these southerly busters. Morning winds out of the northeast at 10 to 15 knots, then increasing to 20 to 35 knots as the sea breeze comes in. Gusts pushing close to 60 kilometres per hour. That's usually very favourable for thunderstorm development. But today, S change is pretty weak, all things considered. Wind observations aren't showing anything particularly strong. Sydney Airport sitting at 25 knots, gusting 35. Montague Island Lighthouse north of Bega at 22 knots. Nothing special there. What this means is thunderstorms are going to be fewer and more isolated in nature. Localised impacts. And here is the main concern. These storms are going to be slow movers. The atmospheric soundings show variable winds in the lower levels, 5 to 10 knots. Very weak steering currents. These cells will drift northwest initially, then swing back toward the northeast later tonight as they develop further. But they'll be crawling along, which means big rain dumpers become our primary threat. Damaging wind gusts and locally heavy to locally intense rainfall are definitely possible. We've got healthy convective available potential energy as well. Instability numbers between 1,500 and 2,000 joules per kilogram, not the biggest numbers in the world. We're not talking about a November or December outbreak here, but for late January, this is half decent for hail potential. Stones between 3 to 5 centimetres are possible. Yesterday, northeastern New South Wales saw some pretty big hailstones around the 5 to 6 centimetre mark. Today, S setup has slightly lower instability and lift compared to yesterday, so we may still see large hail with an outside chance of some localised giant hailstones into the Scenic Rim. But the chance of that is pretty minimal at best. Kuaminya in the Lockyer Valley, you are feeling those weird wind shifts already. Cool breezes followed by warm, sticky, humid ones, then beautiful, cool air again. That's the battle zone setting itself up. The atmosphere is trying to sort itself out before those thunderstorms fire up. Sunday brings a return to calmer conditions as stability increases across southeast Queensland. Still a few showers expected here and there. Heavy rainfall remains in the forecast for today and tomorrow across the north coast of New South Wales and parts of the central coast. With that southeasterly flow kicking up later tonight, showers and maybe the odd thunderstorm or two will move into southeastern Queensland, out into the Warrego region. As far inland as Warrego through tomorrow afternoon and evening. We do have a little bit of convective available potential energy that increases the risk of thundery downpours tomorrow morning into early afternoon, especially around the Brisbane area. Small hail accumulations are possible tomorrow late morning into early afternoon. Remain vigilant for that. Isolated but very heavy rainfall across southeast Queensland tomorrow afternoon and evening is still on the cards. Brisbane, I know you've been asking where the rain is. Why has Brisbane been so dry while the humidity stays absolutely oppressive? Tomorrow might give you a bit of relief, but it's not going to be the widespread soaking some are hoping for. Southeast Queensland and Brisbane have been barren and hot with little rain, yet you are still copping the humid weather. That pattern shifts slightly tomorrow, but real change doesn't arrive until later in the week. Monday sees a return to calmer and more collected conditions across southeast Queensland. Limited shower and thunderstorm activity expected, just possible showers here and there for coastal regions. Tuesday follows a similar pattern. Wednesday, things return to a bit more of a stormy setup as a trough establishes itself further inland. Thursday, Friday and Saturday fall under the influence of a high-pressure ridge building offshore into the Tasman Sea, which means things remain calmer through the southeast coast. So the pattern is couple more thunderstorms, then a few showers, maybe another thunderstorm, then calmer conditions return for the end of the week and potentially out toward next weekend. Now, before turning to the tropical situation, let's talk about what is happening right now across the New South Wales Central Coast. Heavy rainfall has set itself up currently into the Hunter region. A couple of thunderstorms and showers just offshore from the Hunter and Sydney regions. Showers getting jammed up into the Warragamba area because we've got a weak low pressure system situated offshore from the Central Coast, tracking northeast. Throughout today, heavy showers and thunderstorms will stream into this part of the New South Wales coastline. Falls between 40 to 80 millimetres are expected, increasing to 120 millimetres in a few spots. Particularly exposed coastal locations such as Nelson Bay around Newcastle, as far north as Kempsey and Port Macquarie. Rainfall accumulations into the Barrington tops may exceed 100 millimetres. That's the sort of totals we're re-expecting as this low pressure system tracks northeast. Rainfall coming out of that southeasterly pattern, getting itself jammed up against the coastline throughout the afternoon and evening. Showers moving progressively more north through the remainder of today and into tomorrow, where the heaviest rainfall is expected around the Forster and Port Macquarie area. In terms of flooding or flash flooding risk, it's pretty minimal right now. Earlier in the week, some forecast models were showing wacky numbers, 500 or 600 millimetres. We were never looking at that. For that sort of rainfall to develop, we need a very strong low pressure system. We just don't have that. You'd be hard pressed to really detect where the low pressure system is right now, just based on visible satellite imagery, because it is such a weak, messy, disorganised weather system along the New South Wales coastline, turning things tropical now. What's happening around the nation S tropics? A couple of points of interest. We have the remnants of ex-tropical cyclone Koji around the Darwin area. That S bringing very heavy rainfall to Darwin and especially through coastal locations around the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf throughout the remainder of today. The monsoon trough is still very weak across the Northern Territory and into the Kimberley region of Western Australia. A lot of the monsoonal activity has departed ashore from North Queensland. Rainfall is now going to really reduce in the next couple of days for most areas. In fact, for most areas, rainfall is going to completely clear out. That LL give rivers a bit of time to drop water levels to fall, which is very good news because there's some very significant flooding ongoing up there, particularly in northwestern Queensland and into the central coalfields and highlands. Tropical low 14U is spinning itself up quite nicely. It's got a nice central dense overcast, that cluster of thunderstorms around the storm centre. Monsoonal flow into the Solomon Sea around the Solomon Islands, heading over toward Vanuatu and New Caledonia, is feeding the system up quite nicely. This system is expected to make that U-turn, bypassing New Caledonia now, then heading toward Norfolk Island and eventually off toward New Zealand. No threat to either of those locations. New Caledonia may get cyclonic force winds early next week, depending on how this system develops. In terms of a Queensland threat, this system is not expected to approach Queensland in any meaningful capacity. It is not going to come within about 1,500 kilometres of the Queensland coastline. That is good news. Queensland does not need another tropical cyclone at this point in time. The parched ground has sucked up what little wet they've had so far. Only minor flooding despite some areas receiving over 80 millimetres in a day, 300 millimetres so far this year. The ground is still dry enough to absorb heavy falls without immediate major flooding. The future of this tropical picture. We're re-expecting something to develop around the Cape York Peninsula in about 5 or 6 days' time. That's likely to move out into the Coral Sea where development is expected to occur. We are likely to see a tropical low offshore from the north and far north Queensland coast. Now, there's been questions about whether this system will bring a lot of rain. The Bureau of Meteorology is calling for low 17U to form in the Gulf and cross over into the Coral Sea next week. Here is what we're re-looking at. Enhancement in shower and thunderstorm activity expected throughout the remainder of this weekend. That really begins to pick up through the Cape York Peninsula as we head out toward next week. Significant rain accumulations are expected on the western edge of Cape York Peninsula around the Gulf of Carpentaria. Heavy showers and thunderstorms at times through Tuesday and Wednesday through much of Cape York. This is where we're re-expecting our tropical low to begin development offshore from Cape York. Whether that S in the Gulf of Carpentaria or out into the Coral Sea, it is likely to kick itself up sometime around Tuesday or Wednesday next week. That will translate to isolated areas of very heavy rainfall through Cape York, then potentially down into the Daintree rainforest and maybe even the Cassowary coast as well. For those planning moves in the Daintree area Monday or Tuesday, you will want to watch this closely. Crossings are relatively low right now, but if this system develops as expected, that could change quickly. It's been pretty dry, which is good, but heavy rain could make river crossings impassable. The future of this system remains relatively uncertain. It's heavily dependent on where that monsoon trough sets itself up. We're likely to see this system head out into the Coral Sea. A general southeasterly motion is expected from that point, which means if it does get itself out into the Coral Sea, it's actually going to pull away from the Queensland coastline as it intensifies. Queensland impacts are expected to be pretty minimal if they even occur at this point in time. Of course, things can change. That's why we make these forecasts, to monitor the situation and give the latest updates. But at this point, this is not a major concern for Queensland in any way, shape or form. Some of the more aggressive ensemble models are calling for this storm to make a bit of a turn toward Queensland, then turn away. Either way you cut it, it's not expected to make landfall at this point. Definitely not as a tropical cyclone in the next week or so. But we may be talking about some periods of heavy rainfall through the far north coastline of Queensland. I am pretty uncertain on this right now, just considering the fact that this system is actually going to be pulling away from Queensland, relatively speaking, as opposed to drawing into the coastline. It is also not expected to be an absolutely massive system anymore. A couple of forecast runs ago, we were talking around that tropical cyclone Koji development size, which was huge. Right now, I am leaning on a similar story to what tropical cyclone Kimi was doing as it developed. Very broad and messy system, but this one slightly smaller and slightly more organised, moving over toward Western Australia. This is a very interesting one. We could be talking about a pretty significant system offshore from Western Australia. The reason is just because a lot of rainfall is developing around the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf. There is obviously a lot of moisture in the atmosphere coming in from the monsoon. This weekend is going to be significant rainfall-wise through parts of the top end of the Northern Territory, particularly into the northwest coast around the Darwin area. Darwin, the Bureau had lots of rain forecast for today, yet not a drop so far. That is the nature of these monsoon setups. Very localised, very hit and miss. But don't let that fool you. The moisture is there. When it decides to dump, it will dump hard. Looking at rainfall accumulations through this weekend and out toward early next week, 7-day totals around the Darwin area between 200 to 500 millimetres, increasing closer to the coastline, getting up toward the 4, 5, 6 or even up toward the 700 millimetre mark. Offshore, because of the stagnant nature of this low pressure system, massive rainfall accumulations become a possibility. The general trend with forecast models keeps these 1,500 millimetre plus rainfall accumulations far enough offshore that they were not a concern for the Northern Territory coastline. The majority of this rainfall, regardless of how this system develops, is expected to be coastal based, which means flooding is actually not expected to be that much of a problem. But for those in the northwest, particularly between Darwin down to about Kununurra or Wyndham along the coastline, expect to be cut off for a prolonged period of time. Anywhere more than about 200 or 300 millimetres in these areas will cause a bit of damage to the road network, particularly for unsealed roads. Some significant rises to river levels can be expected. Access should be restored by late next week and toward early next weekend. If you live outside of Darwin but south of Darwin down toward Kununurra and Wyndham, plan ahead. Prepare to be cut off for a prolonged period if you have dirt road access. Sealed roads shouldn't be a problem unless there's flooding, which is not expected to be a significant concern right now. But stock up on essentials before this system arrives. Make sure you've got enough supplies to last a week if access gets cut. The remnants of ex-tropical cyclone Koji, now being designated as tropical low 16U, are expected to move out into the warm waters off Western Australia. Then, eventually, probably around next weekend, make a U-turn back toward the West Australian coastline, where that S likely to be at this point in time. It could be the Kimberley region, it could be the Pilbara coastline, it may even make it as far out as Exmouth before making that U-turn. We could be seeing a pretty significant tropical cyclone landfall from this system. Some forecast models are now calling for category 3 to 5 or in that range. This is definitely a watch very closely situation now for those in the Pilbara or the Kimberley region. The forecast for this system has changed a little bit from yesterday. The European forecast model is taking the system into the Kimberley region, then hugging the West Australian coastline through next week through its formative stages. Over the last couple of days, we've been seeing this system heading out into the Indian Ocean pretty consistently, then making that U-turn back down toward Western Australia, sort of toward the end of next week. Friday, that U-turn was likely to happen. This system isn't expected to get anywhere ridiculously far away from the West Australian coastline. We're not going to see this get close to Indonesia or anything like that. But it is expected to remain far enough away that significant intensification remains a possibility. With the System S current forecast track, it kind of hugs the coastline before diving inland. That S a possibility right now, and definitely something that could throw a bunch of nails into the forecast. Whether or not this system is going to hug that Kimberley coastline or that Pilbara coastline, if it does, we'll obviously be talking about a much weaker and much less dangerous tropical cyclone threat. But if this system does actually take that more west-southwesterly motion, then that sharp southeasterly motion into the Kimberley or Pilbara coastline by the end of next week, we could be talking about a very high-end severe tropical cyclone impact. Between Category 3 up toward Category 5, my advice to people between Broome down to about Exmouth, including Karatha, Onslow and Port Hedland and other adjacent communities, particularly those within about 100 kilometres of the coastline, watch this space very closely. There's no immediate tropical cyclone threat right now, but one may be developing in the next couple of days. We'll have a little bit more of an idea in regards to what these forecast models are expecting. All of the more reliable forecast models are suggesting the system to remain on that further offshore track, which does mean a much more significant tropical cyclone impact is a possibility. Details are still pretty murky. We've had this different run from the European model this morning that throws a couple of spanners into the works in terms of inconsistencies we're currently witnessing on the forecast models. Some of the major forecast models, the ICON model, for example, are showing a cyclone Vance type situation with Exmouth, a 928 to 930 hectopascal system going into Exmouth. We're to be looking at winds well in excess of 250 kilometres per hour. That would flatten Exmouth. It gives you the idea that if something does get itself offshore, it's not going to have too much standing in the way of it. A very significant tropical cyclone remains a possibility. For those who've been to Exmouth recently, you know it is a beautiful area. Not much there, but beautiful. If a major cyclone were to impact that region, the devastation would be significant. The Pilbara and Kimberley regions, Daintree get hit by Category 5 systems often, but when they do, the impacts are severe. Let's hope that jet stream pushes any possible cyclones away from the coast. But hope isn't a strategy. If you are in these regions, now is the time to start thinking about your cyclone plan. Secure loose items around the property. Know where your emergency supplies are. Have a plan for where you will shelter if a Category 3 or higher system approaches. Back to the southeast for a moment. All we want is rain in southeast Queensland at this moment. The humidity without the rain is brutal. Glen Innes in northern New South Wales, disgustingly humid. Rain would be nice. That's the sentiment right across the region. Sticky, oppressive conditions without the relief of decent rainfall. Why has Cairns been getting monsoon activity headed south more often? Why does Townsville seem to get a better wet season? It's about the position of the monsoon trough and how those tropical lows track. When systems develop in the Coral Sea and track southwest, Townsville often gets better positioned for the heavy falls. When the monsoon trough sits further north across Cape York, Cairns gets more of the action. This year, the pattern has been variable, with neither location getting consistent heavy falls. Townsville had flash flooding earlier today. Came randomly, as these tropical downpours often do. 1 minute it's fine, the next you've got water rising fast. That's the nature of wet season weather in the tropics. Alpha in central Queensland, raining cats and dogs as well. These isolated heavy falls are typical of this time of year. The Blackwater area, huge amounts of water moving through. The flood camera images show just how much water is in the system. Central Queensland highlands and coalfields have seen significant flooding over recent weeks. The good news is that rainfall is expected to ease, allowing river levels to drop. But it's going to take time. Those river systems are still running very high. For areas that have been flooded, Daintree assume it's safe just because the rain stops. River levels can remain high for days, even weeks, depending on the catchment size. Never drive through floodwater. If it's flooded, forget it. That's the SES message, and it is worth repeating because people still take risks. Looking at the broader pattern, we re-in that transition period between the active monsoon and the build-up to more settled conditions. But that doesn't mean the severe weather is over. Far from it. The tropical systems developing offshore from Western Australia could bring significant impacts in 7 to 10 days. Southeast Queensland and northeastern New South Wales still have thunderstorm potential through the next 48 hours. And the far north Queensland coast will see scattered heavy showers and storms as that tropical low develops midweek. The key message for today, severe thunderstorms possible through the Scenic Rim, Lockyer Valley and northeastern New South Wales this afternoon and evening. Slow-moving cells with heavy rain the main threat. Some large hail possible, but not expected to be as significant as yesterday's hailstorms. Tomorrow, continued shower and storm activity across southeast Queensland, with small hail possible around Brisbane late morning into early afternoon. For the week ahead, Monday and Tuesday looking calmer across the southeast. Wednesday sees a return to stormier conditions. Then a high-pressure ridge brings more settled weather Thursday through the weekend. In the tropics, watch the development in the Coral Sea midweek. Queensland impacts expected to be minimal, but heavy rain possible for Cape York and potentially the Daintree region. Western Australia, this is the one to watch closely. Potential for a very significant tropical cyclone impact to the Pilbara or Kimberley coast late next week or next weekend. Category 3 to 5 intensity possible if the system tracks offshore, as models suggest. Preparation is key. For those in the northwest of WA, start thinking about your plans now. Daintree, wait until the last minute. These systems can intensify rapidly once they get into the right environment. And if you in southeast Queensland or northeastern New South Wales, today's thunderstorms deserve respect. They want to be widespread, but where they do develop, they could produce dangerous conditions. Stay informed. Check the Bureau of Meteorology for the latest warnings and forecasts. They're doing excellent work monitoring these systems. Follow your local emergency services on social media for real-time updates. And if you are in a storm-prone area, make sure your emergency kit is ready. Torch, batteries, first aid supplies, enough water and non-perishable food for 72 hours. That is the detailed breakdown for today and the week ahead. Significant weather across multiple parts of the country. From the thunderstorms in the southeast to the tropical developments in the north and west, there's plenty to keep an eye on. The most critical situation developing is that potential major cyclone for Western Australia. We'll have more clarity on that in the coming days as the models converge on a solution. For now, stay safe, stay informed, and take the appropriate precautions for your area. If you've found this forecast helpful, I'll be back later today with an update on the Coral Sea situation and the Western Australian system as well. Until then, keep